Reprise de débat. The honourable member for Ottawa South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good evening to my colleagues and to Canadians who are watching the debate this evening. I'm really pleased to be here to speak to Bill C-74. It's an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on February 27, 2018. Madam Speaker, I want to begin by making some general remarks about what we've been doing as a government since our arrival almost 2.5 years ago. And I think the key message I want to leave with Canadians this evening and to members of the House this evening is this. The message is that we have a plan, that our plan is working, that we chose to invest in our people, that we chose to invest in our country, that we did not choose to cut, we did not choose austerity, we left those choices to other political persuasions in this House. And our plan, as I say, Madam Speaker, is undoubtedly, objectively, factually working. Over the last 2 years, Canada's economic growth has been fueled by a stronger middle class, Canadians' hard work combined with historic investments in people and in communities, chiefly in infrastructure, light rail, for example, in the great region here of the National Capital Region of Ottawa-Carleton. This has helped to create more good jobs, almost 600,000 of them since November 2015, while more help for those who need it most has meant more money for people to save, to invest, and to spend in their communities. At the same time, Madam Speaker, and it's important for Canadians to know this, with respect to unemployment at the national level, the jobless rate stayed at 5.8% in March for a second consecutive month, and for the third time since December, to match its lowest mark, Madam Speaker, since Statistics Canada started measuring the indicator in 1976. Wow. The only other time the rate slipped to this level was 2007. That's the lowest unemployment level in Canada in 42 years. Now, at the local level, Madam Speaker, right here in our National Capital Region, which I have the privilege of representing, the Capital Region added 2,500 new net jobs in February, helping to push down the local unemployment rate to 5.1% in February from 5.2% in January. However, in March, it dropped to 4.9%, and in April, it dropped again to 4.2%. The region's unemployment rate remaining well below that of the country as a whole. That's a 30-year low, Madam Speaker, in the National Capital Region. So the economy is on fire. Unemployment is way down. It's dropping. Canada has the best balance sheet in the G7, with the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio. The lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7, which we're convening and hosting here next week in Canada. Our debt as a function of our economy is steadily shrinking. It's projected to soon reach its lowest point in almost 40 years. That means, Madam Speaker, that Canada has the confidence to make investments in our future that will strengthen and grow the middle class. It will lay a more solid foundation for next generations of Canadians to come. It means we can retrofit our core infrastructure, housing, transit, post-secondary institutions, research and development. And we can partner with our provincial and municipal partners to be able to leverage additional billions of dollars of investment in those core critical areas for our future by cooperating. That has been a central tenet of the government's approach since it arrived 2.5 years ago. Cooperate with other orders of government to leverage as much support as we can for priority investments. The budget 2018, the document is called Equality Plus Growth Equals a Strong Middle Class, supports the government's people-centred approach. It's guided by a new gender results framework, and it proposes to ensure that every Canadian has a real and a fair chance of success. This is about taking the next steps, Madam Speaker, to build an equal, a competitive, a sustainable, and a fair Canada, where science and curiosity and innovation spur economic growth. Here are some of the key Budget 2018 measures that this bill aims to implement that I wanted to spend a bit of time sharing with Canadians this evening. First thing I want to remind Canadians is this. The budget introduces a new Canada Workers' Benefit. We know that Canadians are working very, very hard to join the middle class, and they deserve to have their hard work rewarded with greater opportunities for success. That's why we are introducing the new Canada Workers' Benefit. It's a more generous, a more accessible benefit that will put more money in the pockets of low-income workers than the working income tax benefit, the so-called WITB, that it replaces. This CWB will increase both maximum benefits and the income level at which the benefit is phased out. As a result, a low-income worker earning $15,000, for example, could receive up to almost $500 more in 2019 to invest in the things that are important to them. By allowing more low-income workers to keep more of their paychecks, this will deliver real help to more than 2 million Canadians who are working hard to join the middle class, raising about 70,000 Canadians out of poverty. Why is that important, Madam Speaker? It's important because the economic consensus is clear. Only a foolish country, only a foolish jurisdiction would let its people slide behind. Only a foolish country would not want to avail itself of all of the talent in its talent pool by giving effect to it, by helping to shape it, to educate it, and to give it opportunity to be able to move forward and prosper. So the first big announceable in the budget is the Canada Workers' Benefit, of which we are more than proud. The second thing I want to remind Canadians about, Madam Speaker, is what we're doing with the Canada Child Benefit. Now, the Canada Child Benefit was introduced in 2016. We're strengthening that very benefit in this budget. We know from our last year and a half of experience that 9 out of 10 Canadian families have extra help each and every month to pay for things like nutritious food, sports programs, music lessons, school supplies, the basics. Families receiving this Canada Child Benefit are getting about $6,800 on average in payments this year. There are millions of dollars, for example, being shared with families in my riding of Ottawa South every month to provide that very help. To ensure that the almost 6 million children who currently benefit from the CCB continue to benefit from it in the long term, here's a big change. We're indexing the Canada Child Benefit starting this July so that it continues to increase in value every year going forward. For a single parent of 2 children making, say, $35,000 a year, a strengthened CCB will mean $560 more next year, tax-free, for books, skating lessons, or warm clothes for winter. To help more families access the Canada Child Benefit and other benefits, Budget 2018 will also provide funding to reach out to more Indigenous Canadian communities, which face distinct barriers when it comes to accessing federal benefits. As Canada's economy continues to grow and create good, well-paying jobs, the government will ensure that all Canadians share in and, yes, benefit from the success. Just recently, Madam Speaker, I received a phone call from a single mum in my riding. She makes $14 an hour, soon $15 an hour with the Ontario minimum wage increase. And she was in tears, frankly, of gratefulness, because as a single mum of 3 children, she's receiving almost $9,000 a year, tax-free of additional support. And she told me she could not make ends meet without that support and would have to look for new housing to move her 3 kids into a 1-bedroom apartment as opposed to a 2-bedroom apartment. I think that makes a difference in that mother's life. I think it makes a difference in those 3 children's lives. Now, turning more specifically to the economy itself, Madam Speaker, I want to talk about lower taxes for small businesses in Canada and some of the opportunity for all Canadians that flow from those lower taxes. Despite what people may say otherwise, The fact is, our government is lowering taxes on small businesses from 11% in 2015 to 9% by 2019. This will leave more money for small business owners to reinvest in their business and create jobs, up to $7,500 more per year. Madam Speaker, we know that 99.8% of all Canadian businesses are 100 employees or less. That is the lion's share, the huge lion's share of the Canadian economy. We are targeting those very businesses in terms of those small business tax drops. As we move ahead with this small business tax rate reduction, we are taking action to make sure that the small business rate is not used to gain unfair tax advantages. We're proposing to take further steps to limit the ability of very high income earners to use private corporations to hold millions of dollars in passive investment portfolios and receive significant tax benefits. We consulted widely about this, and we listened. The design of these proposals is based directly on the feedback we received during those consultations. With these proposals, less than 3% of private corporations will be affected. 90% of the tax impact will be borne by households in the top 1%. That is, the very wealthiest of hardworking Canadians. Why is it important to focus on small businesses, Madam Speaker? Because 8 out of 10 jobs are being created today by small businesses. And so we will continue to support our entrepreneurs and our owners of SMEs as we move forward. And yet another theme, which I believe is indispensable to the future of our economy, and for that matter, our well-being and our survival. And that is the question of addressing carbon pollution, climate change, and supporting clean growth. As has been said in this House many times, Madam Speaker, a clean environment and a strong economy go hand in hand. We have decided to make further investments towards a healthy and sustainable low-carbon economy going forward, one that creates growth and middle-class jobs while preserving our natural heritage for future generations. In fact, Madam Speaker, globally, this is the trend. We are embroiled in a race. It's a competitive race which involves the United States and China, Indonesia, and the Congo. Pretty much every country is involved now in the global race to retool their economies. They're in a global race targeting efficiency. It's about becoming more efficient with energy, more efficient with water, more efficient with material inputs, more efficient when it comes to transportation of goods, more efficient in terms of minimizing waste. All of these efficiency races that we're running are global races. And so we have no choice. From an economic perspective alone, we have no choice but to get on that track and run that race. Some would have us not even lace up our running shoes. We believe that would be a mistake. Jurisdictions all over the world understand that is the competitive edge, which is why we have decided, like every European Union country, like so many other jurisdictions in the world, to put a price on carbon pollution. It's central to Canada's plan to fight climate change and grow the economy. Economists everywhere have told us, and they recognize that this is one of the most effective, transparent, and efficient ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's the use of a market mechanism, Madam Speaker, to achieve an environmental outcome. That's why Ronald Reagan and the Republicans in the United States negotiated a deal with Brian Mulroney as Prime Minister to use a cap-and-trade system to eliminate NOx and SOx, nitrous oxides and sulfur dioxides, from American power plants burning coal to generate electricity. That's how we eliminated acid rain in North America. That's how we were able to protect so much of our fresh water systems in the American and North American Northeast. It is, in fact, an idea that comes, if I might say, from the right. It comes from the conservative or Republican-leaning thinkers in most economic schools of thought. That's why Preston Manning supports the use of pricing carbon. And that's why Stephen Harper went to London, England, and gave a major energy superpower speech to the world's energy top executives, saying he was moving to price carbon and even gave them a planned price by 2018 for a ton of carbon dioxide. In December 2016, the Government of Canada, along with most provinces and territories, worked with our Indigenous partners, and we adopted a pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change. The framework includes an approach to price and carbon pollution with the aim of having carbon pricing in place across Canada, yes, by 2018. But the kicker, Madam Speaker, is that provinces and territories will have the flexibility to choose between two systems: an explicit price-based system, or a carbon tax, and a cap-and-trade system, which is in place, for example, in Ontario, whereas BC has chosen a carbon tax. What we do know is that 80% of Canadians already live in jurisdictions where a price on carbon exists. So Canada is going to move forward and build on those provincial successes to be able to make the progress we need to make. Now, Madam Speaker, this is not only about doing good. This is about doing well economically. There are vast markets to conquer. There are huge energy efficiency opportunities and technological opportunities all over the planet, which Canadian entrepreneurs can move forward and conquer and compete for. And that is why it is so important for us to marry both carbon pricing and support for our clean tech sector, which is why one of our primary investments when it comes to supercluster innovation hubs is in the area of supporting clean growth technologies going forward. Now, if I could, Madam Speaker, I want to talk to an issue which is fundamental to many of my constituents and to so many thousands, tens of thousands of seniors in Canada, and that is the Canada Pension Plan. Now here, this is something that as an MP for 14 years I have been fighting for, both in and out of government. For over a decade, I've been trying to see progress and make progress on the CPP, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that our government made a commitment to Canadians to help them realize their goal of a strong and secure and stable retirement. It was, after all, Paul Martin, as Minister of Finance, I think we can objectively agree in this House on all sides, that made sure that our CPP was actuarially sound for at least 85 years going forward. Compare and contrast that with the American Social Security system, which the last time I looked at it, Madam Speaker, I was informed that its shelf life was about 18 months. So the American distinction there is that they've not retrofitted, they have not reformed, they have not worked to ensure a safe and stable retirement fund for its people, the way we have here in Canada. Every 3 years, finance ministers review the Canada Pension Plan together to ensure that we are continuing to respond to the needs of Canadian retirees, workers, and employees. So we want to build in this budget on the strong partnership on the historic agreement signed in 2016, a major breakthrough to enhance the Canada Pension Plan for everyday working Canadians. The 2016 agreement will increase the maximum CPP retirement pension by about 50% over time. That's an incredible step forward, Madam Speaker. At their recent meeting, finance ministers agreed to strengthen the Canada Pension Plan to provide greater benefits, for example, to parents whose income drops after the birth or adoption of their child, or to persons with disabilities, to spouses who are widowed at a young age, and to the estates of lower income contributors. It's important not to allow our retirees, Madam Speaker, to slip into poverty. Poverty costs. It costs much more at the front end, at the back end, than it does at the front end, which is why we are addressing this issue of poverty as best we can going forward. Is it perfect? Not nearly. Are we making progress? Absolutely we are. And Canadians are counting on us to continue to work in this regard. All of these changes to the CPP, Madam Speaker, all of this will be done in this budget without any increase to the Canada Pension Plan contribution rates paid by workers and employers. Paid by workers and employers. Ministers agreed to move forward with regulations to ensure that the CPP enhancement remains appropriately funded over time. And finally, Madam Speaker, I want to talk about support for Canada's veterans. Our government's committed to the well-being of the veterans and their families. We have delivered in this bill on a pension for life option. We're looking forward to making progress in that regard. It's a monthly payment for life, tax-free.
Unfortunately, the time is up, and I'm sure that the member will be able to provide anything that he may have not been able to finish through the questions and comments. Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent.
I'm very pleased to participate in this debate. I welcome the fact that the honourable member did an interesting speech. For sure, he presented and tabled some of his ideas and some of his policies defended by his government, but he also failed to recognize some difficulty that Canadians will have to address thanks to this budget. First of all, Madam Speaker, I would like to ask the member, when he was elected less than 3 years ago, he was elected with a program talking about small deficit and zero deficit in 2019. The reality of the day, Madam Speaker, is huge deficit, 3 times as expected, and zero idea when we will get back to zero deficit. So I would like to know from the member what he thinks of the result of this government, who have been elected with precise promises on deficit and who pushed it in the garbage.
The member for Ottawa South.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to remind my colleague I was, in fact, elected 14 years ago, but elected in the government for the second time, he's right, 2.5 years ago, and honoured to have been elected to serve in that regard. I do want to just remind the member who is himself more recently elected that under the previous government, in fairness and objectively, the previous government increased the national debt by $160 billion. It is true that the previous government faced a 2008 economic crisis, as did the Canadian provinces. It is true that in some sectors, begrudgingly, the government worked, for example, with the province of Ontario to provide assistance to our auto sector. Every loan, of course, since then has been paid back with interest. It is important to remember that we had a choice to make, and it was a stark choice. The Conservative Party ran on a platform of austerity and cuts. We ran on a platform of investing in Canadians and investing in core infrastructure. This is our moment, not just to keep the pump primed, Madam Speaker, but to lay the groundwork for a century of success for Canadians by making sure that we've got the hard infrastructure we need and making sure that more and more Canadians are joining the middle class and have great equal opportunity to succeed and contribute and thrive.
And comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for South Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Ottawa South for his interesting speech. I do, through you, Madam Speaker, wonder how often that the member actually gets out of the Ottawa bubble, because the jobs that he says are being created here, government jobs that are being created here in this area, are not translating into rural Canada. In Saskatchewan, the unemployment rate has gone up 2% since this government has been in power. And in fact, the last month it's gone up 0.2% again. And we're seeing people without jobs. And I'm wondering if he can comment, because he did talk a bit about the infrastructure building. There are no infrastructure builds that are going to rural Saskatchewan. I'm wondering if he can comment on that.
The honourable member for Ottawa South.
Well, I would just remind my good friend that in the National Capital Region, the top employer is, in fact, the tourism sector, followed by the government sector, followed by 2,800 IT firms. Now, it was 5,000 high-tech firms at one point. We were called Silicon Valley North, and we're working hard as a community to reclaim some of that space. We're very proud of the investments our government's making across the country, including in Saskatchewan right now, in one of the super clusters, to help give rise to new startups and new companies to compete and to win. But when it comes to the question of unemployment and investments, I mean, the numbers are undeniable. These are the lowest unemployment rates in 42 years across the country. Across the country. The lowest unemployment here in the Greater National Capital Region in 18 ridings in 30 years. So clearly something's working, Madam Speaker. We believe we have the right combination here of investing, stimulating the economy, providing the right tax incentives, investing in our people, supporting research and development, helping our competitive companies conquer global markets through EDC and other institutions. And we believe we put together the right kind of amalgamated approach, which is, I think, increasingly the envy of the world.
Comments? Questions, commentaires? The honourable parliamentary the honourable member for Masquinongé, Berthier Masquinongé.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
For his speech today in the House, and I think he, had the chance to remind everybody that he had been elected for 14 years, serving his constituents for that period of time. We got to remember that there's a lot of inequality here in Canada, and it seems to be increasing. A promise that the Liberals made during the election campaign was to table legislation and deal with pay equity. We know that the latest census data shows us that Indigenous women in Ontario face 43% gender pay gap. Radicalized women face a 38% pay gap. Immigrant women face a 34% pay gap. Why did they not include anything to deal with this in the budget?
I member for Ottawa South.
I first want to agree with my colleague that pay equity is a big challenge for Canada. It's an area and a theme that we've got to work harder on addressing. It's one that I think manifests unfairness in the workplace. And it goes back to something, it harkens back to something I said earlier in my remarks, Madam Speaker. When it comes to gender, when it comes to country of origin, when it comes to linguistic background, it doesn't really matter, does it now? Because only a foolish country would not want to avail itself of all of the talent within its borders. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with this budget and the budgets that have that preceded it and the ones we hope that will follow it, which is to give the support that Canadians need to get the best out of themselves so that we as a people can not only build a society, continue to build a society which is fair and where there's equality of opportunity, but is also effectively the envy of the world. Madam Speaker, I like to remind people all the time that an economy is not a society, or that a society is not just an economy. It's actually more. So we're trying to bring in a series of balanced measures that will address exactly the kind of important issue that she's raised here this evening to make progress. And once again, Madam Speaker, I had the privilege of living and working in over 70 countries for a decade before being elected in this House and serving as a public servant in another setting. And let me assure this House of one thing that I have retained since that time and still see now. Canada is increasingly being seen as the envy of the world and leading as an example that's worthy of following.
In comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if my colleague could talk about the importance of infrastructure. It's so critically important, I believe, that we invest in Canada's infrastructure, and that infrastructure takes many different forms. And I know my colleague has had a great deal of thought on the whole issue of the importance of supporting Canada's middle class. And one of the ways we could do that is by investing in the infrastructure, and if he could provide his thoughts on it.
The honourable member for Ottawa South.
Well, thanks to my colleague for that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's 2018. So much of the infrastructure that we benefit from in this country was built perhaps 50, maybe even 100 years ago. It's time to invest for the future. Let's take, for example, light rail investments or transit investments in our major urban areas. Madam Speaker, the city of Montreal is now 53% of the population of Quebec. Gatineau, right across the river, is the fastest growing city in Quebec. Metropolitan Toronto is pushing 8 million people. We are increasingly becoming an urban country. There are merits to that, there are challenges to that, but we're investing very, very heavily in light rail and transit systems with our provincial and municipal partners. A second area, we're investing very heavily in water and wastewater systems to make sure that one of the most precious resources that we possess in this country, and we're blessed with so much of fresh water, but we have an obligation to protect it. We have to reinvest in our water and wastewater systems to stop waste because we have so many water systems that are leaking so much water. We've got to improve to secondary and tertiary water treatment systems. And by the way, as we do that, we develop technologies and implement technologies that can be sold all over the world. So in housing, we're talking about green housing. We're talking about housing for our needy, for our veterans, for seniors, that's affordable. We're talking about energy efficiency when it comes to housing. We're making progress in the infrastructure, not just because we know it's got to be replaced, but it's got to be replaced to a new standard, to higher energy efficiency standards and water standards. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. That's the race. And as we do more of that here in Canada, we can sell more technology, more know-how, more products. And that is exactly how we've tied together these investments in infrastructure with our foreign global market opportunities.